Peter Pan and Wendy by J.M Barrie, retold by May Byron. Chapter 1. A Strange Appearance. It was number 14 where the Darling family lived. I can't say in what street, but they knew the street well enough themselves. Mrs. Darling, their mother, was the chief person in the house. She was a most lovely lady, and one couldn't look at her without wanting to kiss her. Mr. Darling went every day to the city, and what he did there nobody quite understood, but it was something very important. The three children were Wendy, who was 9, John, who was 7, and Michael, who was only 4, but tried to keep his age a secret. Mrs. Darling had 2 servants. Liza was the house parlour maid, such a tiny little midget, and Nana, the children's nurse, was a big Newfoundland dog. It is very uncommon, of course, to have a dog for a nurse, but Nana was a treasure. She was so fond of the children that she could be trusted to look after them in every way: bath, clean clothes, medicine, tidy nursery, all the rest of it. She did not actually teach them their lessons. No doubt she could have done so, only Mr. Darling disapproved of that idea. But she took them to school every day, carrying an umbrella in her mouth if the day looked rainy, and waited there to bring them safely back. She never was forgetful or cross, nor did she ever get a bone in her leg like some nurses, so that she couldn't romp with the children. They had simply lovely games together in the evenings. So the Darlings were extremely happy people, and perhaps the children were happiest of all, for whatever they had not really got, they pretended they had it in their make-believe island called Neverland. This island wasn't a really truly one, you see, so it changed about a good deal, according to who was thinking about it. John lived there, that is, he pretended he did, in a boat turned bottom up on the seashore. He had no friends or companions, but he had a lagoon with flamingos flying over it. They were splendid birds for shooting at, and always missing. Michael's make-believe island was quite different, but then he was very small, and his mind had not yet quite arranged itself. He had pretence friends who only visited him by night in his wigwam, and outside there was a flamingo with lagoons flying over it. As for Wendy, she made up a delicious place for herself. She lived in a little house of leaves stitched together and kept a pet orphan wolf. It was frightfully interesting. Of course, when the 3 little Darlings were playing, their 3 Neverlands got rather mixed and crowded. But that's the good of a make-believe island. You can cram it up with all sorts of things, and although it may become hopelessly jumbled, it will never burst. Every night when Mrs. Darling put her little ones to bed, she picked up small scraps of information about the Neverland. They were all odds and ends because no one seemed able to describe it very clearly. But what puzzled her beyond anything was a name which she heard the children mention more and more often as time went on. This name was Peter. Now, she did not know any Peters, nor did any of the children, so at last she asked Wendy, "But who is Peter?" "Why, Peter Pan, you know, Mother." Mrs. Darling had to think a lot before she began to remember. Yes, when she was very young, she believed there was a little boy named Peter Pan who had flown out of window when he was a baby and never could come back or grow up. He was supposed to live with the fairies in Kensington Gardens, which is a leafy part of London. She felt sure he was only a story, not a real child. But when she explained to Wendy, "My love, you must have been dreaming," Wendy said, "Oh no, he isn't a dream. He comes through the window in the night, you see, and sits on the end of my bed and plays to me on his pipes. It's perfectly sweet. So is he." "Oh, but that's nonsense," said Mrs. Darling. "How could anybody get in? The window is 3 floors up." "Well, you see those leaves on the floor, mother. He left them there last night. They were not there when we went to bed." Mrs. Darling was so surprised she could not tell what to say. Certainly there were some strange skeleton leaves on the nursery floor by the window, and they were not off any English tree she had ever seen. She peered about on the floor for footmarks, and she felt up the chimney with the poker. Not a sign of anybody, and it was 30 feet from the window to the pavement. Very odd. When she talked to Mr. Darling about it, he put all the blame upon Nana. He said, "It's just the sort of rubbish a dog would stuff into children's heads. Don't take any notice." To tell the truth, Mr. Darling and Nana did not get on very well together. "The children will soon forget about it if you say no more." But the very next night, Mrs. Darling found out for herself. She sat beside the nursery fire, by the glimmer of 3 night lights, sewing something for Michael. And she fell asleep over her work, and she dreamed that she saw the Neverland, all in a misty haze, quite close. A boy broke through the mist, leaving a gap behind him. And there were the faces of Wendy, John, and Michael, gazing at her through the gap. While the dream was still there, the nursery window flew open, and a boy dropped in upon the floor. A queer little light came with him, which darted and danced about the room like quicksilver. Mrs. Darling awoke and saw this boy, a most beautiful person about Wendy's age, dressed in skeleton leaves from unknown trees, and she was quite certain that directly minute that this was Peter Pan.